Hi, thanks for tuning in to In the Studio here at Davis Community Television, a project of Davis Media Access. In the Studio features newsmakers and community members of interest in our community and helps become part of our community's archive, documenting important moments. You can watch In the Studio at 7 p.m. on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays on DCTV, Channel 15 on the Comcast cable system, or Menu 99 on AT&T's Universe. And once the show has aired, it becomes part of our permanent archive online at dctv.davismedia.org. As always, In the Studio is both a hands-on learning lab where we work with volunteers who are running the cameras and the other equipment tonight. So I'd like to thank them and thank Diane Dadashka, our studio manager, for providing tutelage. So tonight, my guest is Dennis Dingemans. Welcome, Dennis.
Hello. Hello, Autumn.
Glad you're here tonight. Dennis was a UCDavis faculty member from 1972 to 2005. He taught and researched historical, regional, and urban geography. Active in college and city affairs, he also co-authored Arcadia's Woodland and currently directs the Hattie Weber Museum in Davis. But tonight, we're here to talk to him about his role as co-author of this book, University of California at Davis. Part of the Campus History series, this book is really a pictorial history of some very important times in both our nation and our local campus's history. So thanks so much for being here to talk about this tonight.
Well, it was a pleasure to write the book. I taught at the university for 33 years, and it has a way of becoming a very big part of your life and identity.
I'll bet. So how did the book come about? And you have a co-author, by the way.
Yes, well, the book came about because Arcadia is casting about for authors to write books about places.
Okay.
They have more than 8,000 titles in print, and they haven't done as many universities as they would like. And so they basically asked me, because I had done the Woodland book,
Right.
And then they proceeded to make it difficult for me to get the contract. So it was an amusing piece of negotiation.
But you got it, obviously,
Yes,
because we have a
yes.
book. Right. Well, I learned a lot reading this book. I'm a UCDavis alum, and so it was interesting from that perspective, but I enjoy history. And I loved that it was a visual history. And so you have brought a lot of photos tonight that we're going to spend some time walking our way through. I'm not sure we'll get to them all, but we'll see how many we can get to. Before we do that, though, I want to read, I found a couple interesting statistics online. So UCDavis is considered as a public Ivy. That means it's very well ranked, very well thought of. In 2013, U.S. News and World Record ranked UCDavis as the 8th best public university in the United States, 38th nationally, and the 3rd best of the UC schools after UC Berkeley and UCLA. Washington Monthly ranked UCDavis 17th in its 2012 National College ranking based on the school's contributions to the life of the nation. And so our university has grown into a very big deal, both in terms of research, in terms of academic excellence, and you were there for a large part of that history, 1972 to 2005?
Yes, when I first got a chance to teach here temporarily, my friends who were real Berkeley alums said, well, how could you possibly stay at Davis? It's really a very small time. And, well, it's not small time anymore. It's more research dollars per year than Berkeley has.
Right.
And we've proven we can make news, both good and ugly, as well as Berkeley has.
This is true. So the book really starts with the history of the campus as the farm extension, the university farm to UC Berkeley,
yes.
And goes on from there. So let's talk about those very early days. And I think your first picture sort of corresponds to that, doesn't it?
Yes.
If we could see that.
Yes, a key to getting the campus for Davis was that we had irrigation water, that we had just, in Davis here, arranged to get water from Cache Creek by way of a canal that went from Esparto to Winters and then along Pewter Creek. Mm-hmm. So a provision of the legislature said, we want a campus that has irrigation because irrigation is the future of California agriculture. And the first thing we built was a water tower. Technically a tank house, but it's really a water tower in everyone's mind. And quite a striking building it is. And in the background is North Hall, and it looks fairly insignificant compared to this dramatic water tower that was the real business of the farm part of it, the campus.
So what year was this?
This is 1908.
1908, okay.
It would have been a year earlier, but the funds were held up for a year when the state of California responded to the earthquake by having a great deal of expenditure on infrastructure.
Right.
So this would have been a 1907 water tower, but it was delayed a year.
Well, they weren't far off the mark when they estimated the importance of water in our state's development. So, should we look at the next picture?
Yes. This is looking on the backside, about 15 years later. And in this photograph looking toward Pewter Creek, we see 8 barns, 4 of which still exist today, including the hog barn, which is fairly central. There's a great number of orchards and vegetable crops. The Department of Truck Crops is out here. And there are 8 sheds and there are 52 shacks in that photograph. If we call a shack the pig houses and the chicken houses that are in the photograph. This was a working agricultural setting.
Right. So when did we move from being the farm or the farm extension to becoming a full-fledged university?
Well, we're a full-fledged agricultural university fairly early on. And we still are a farm, but we have so much more.
Right.
That really happened in the 1950s, when there was such a desperate need for general campuses that this campus got more and more agricultural items and a whole lot of ordinary things that every campus had. 1,000 students in the psychology major, et cetera.
Right, but even up until that point. So one of the things I noticed reading the book is that the book really moves along in chunks of history. So, for example, where I kind of started reading was the period between 1921 to 1944. I was not alive then, and it helped me realize just how much went on in that period in both our nation's history and locally here at UCDavis. For example, we were in the period between world wars. The nation went through the Depression, and all of that impacted. What were some of the things that were happening among student life during that time?
Well, student life was getting more and more serious. Fraternity traditions got more well-rooted. Fraternity houses got built. And in student life, the university cleaned up its act a bit. They forbid many of the rough housing, farm boy activities. That were one tradition. The second-year students would throw the first-year students into the irrigation pond.
Yeah, I saw that picture.
in the 30s, we decided that was a little too rugged, and we abandoned the tug of war where the loser gets dragged through the mud, and it was a very hazardous operation.
Right.
We abandoned some of those traditions in terms of student life.
There was also a lot of development in that time period in areas such as dairy. There were a lot of really fun pictures in here of the dairy students. Agricultural engineering, pomology. Can we go back to your pictures and see some of the stuff that was going on?
Well, this is from the water tower looking in the other direction toward the quad, the academic side of things. And already by 1922, we have a very dignified classroom and library building in the left. We've filled the quad with North Hall, South Hall, East Hall, and West Hall. Roughly the quad is as dense as it is today. So yes, we filled in both the classrooms as well as more agricultural activities. One of the slides that I'm not showing here was the hemp operation in 1919, where we had a hemp production research farm. Now this is a wonderful photograph of the gate facing College Park. It represents a reorientation of the front face of the university to be what was the Transcontinental Highway, which ran along what is 5th Street. But it is also important that in 1926, students during their Labor Day operation, they contributed a day of labor in the middle of winter. They built these gates. They paved the road. They planted the trees, faculty and students together. So there was a tradition in the 30s that got stronger of volunteer labor. That was done in 1964. when the university realized that insurance policies shouldn't have students doing the kind of labor that ordinarily trained employees do.
I was going to say, I think that was lost somewhere over the years.
Yeah.
That gate you mentioned, so that would roughly be where Howard Way runs into Russell Boulevard right now.
Yes,
today.
It's where that incredibly long stoplight is, where you
Yes.
have to wait for 1 or 2 cars to go into International House.
Right. Okay, going back to the photos.
Here's an emphasis we discovered almost by accident. We have twice as many photographs of people than we have of buildings. We began with a bias for buildings, and that tends to be the dominant photograph in this series. But we have twice as many times we have photographs of important people. And this is Mrack in black. And this is Emil Mrack, the chancellor who said yes to everything, and the chancellor who gave the legislature confidence to give all the money they could to Davis. With Bob Black, himself a spectacular public relations specialist and a very gifted politician, playing horseshoes in 1967, shortly after he became head of ASUCD. And when he was in the middle of being the equivalent of Emil Mrack for the general campus, Emil got us the med school. Bob Black was getting us Unitrans, the radio station, and the experimental college. You name it, Bob Black provided it.
You know, I saw a panel with Bob recently, and he was among panelists who were discussing 40 years worth of innovations here in Davis. And all those things you just mentioned, the coffee house, Unitrans, experimental college, they're all still part of campus life today. Yes. And in fact, I believe we're the last UC campus to have an experimental college. Isn't that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
As Bob Summers said in a wonderful editorial in the Davis Enterprise 2 weeks ago, at Berkeley they caused trouble. At Davis we caused solutions. And the domes, the foam domes, remember?
The domes, Bag End, and those are still in existence. They were almost wiped out last year, and they're still there.
Yep.
So, all right, so moving on through our historical periods.
Now here's Harry Brenner, who is a wonderful story and part of the many personalities who made this a really first-class campus. He was an aircraft mechanic, and the Department of Viticulture needed somebody to run the machinery. They got a big grant to study conditions of fermentation. And he's the guy who could read the instrumentation for temperature, pressure, and chemical components. And he spent 34 years and became the campus vendor. And I interviewed him after we picked this photo. We said, "Who is this guy down in the cellar with the sherry cask?" And he's been retired for 24 years and has a tidy little house on I Street. I was just delighted to be interviewed.
That's great.
Oh, excuse me, his wife was delighted to be interviewed.
So
anyway, there he is.
They hired him because he knew how to fly a plane. He could read the instrumentation.
Well, he knew how to repair the plane and read the instrumentation.
There you go. And who do we have here?
We have Milton Hildebrand, who was one of many excellent faculty members and charismatic leaders in the music department and political science and history. You name it, there were charismatic faculty members. Milton Hildebrand was the tops of the tops. He wrote a report on what it takes to do good teaching, and then went out and proved that he knew what he could do. Most famously, he taught a course in human sexuality, a serious scientific course on animals and humans and human sexuality. And at a peak, he had 1,700 students a year. And the important thing about it is he had put his charming, charismatic personality to a topic that students were curious about and needed to know about. And he did something that wasn't academically very dignified, to teach a popular course for undergraduates.
Right.
But he was here for the students.
Exactly. And our next photo here.
This is a part of Picnic Day in the mid-1960s, and it's the Struve Hall's float says, "We're proud of the scope of our campus." And there was a great deal of attention, you read in the student yearbooks, to how we were broadening, and we were not just a farm school, that we were a full, diverse campus.
Right. So I don't know where we are in terms of the times of our pictures, but
we're in chapter 4.
Well, I'm thinking of the period as I was reading the book between 1946 and 1958, and the hallmarks of that time were really tremendous campus growth and the rise of veterinary science as a real discipline here.
Yes, and if we could look at the next photograph or two. This is women driving a wagon loaded with hay. This is 1941, and they're riding around the quad because exam A for a long time required that you know how to use a horse to plow. You couldn't graduate in agriculture without being able to drive a wagon. And here are the women driving a wagon load of hay. Next. The image was so pervasive that we were a farm campus that we could make fun of it. This is a group of Alpha Gamma Rho fraternity students, and underneath it says the dudes hang out around their hang out in front of their bunkhouse. And I didn't put it in, but the next photo in the same yearbook showed girls wearing their bib overalls. Well, at the same time, we had the Can we go back one? We had the Cosmopolitan Club. We had a professor, John Gilmore, who fostered international relations, fostered international awareness. And this is, in 1923, part of the student body. And there are many people from Asia, from the Middle East. They're from Africa. It was incredibly ethnically diverse. And John Gilmore was a little lefty. He was an incredibly sophisticated guy. We weren't the sticks when people like John Gilmore.
Right. Well, speaking of women, I did notice looking through the pictures, it took a long time for women to start showing up in these pictures. And I'm making an assumption that's because women really weren't here very much at first.
They were a very small minority, and the university worked very hard to try to attract more women. Now, here are 84 women. It's from the tradition of a spring sing, which is a choral event that some people want to find a way to revive. Next. And this, you see women, you mentioned women, and here they are. Here's a revival in 1960 of the tug of war, where the women are two teams are pulling each other. And I was at the Gibson House a week ago, Sunday, and Karen Lafferty came up to me and said, "Dennis, I loved your book. I would have been in the picture in this in the tug of war, except my team was winning. So we were pulling the other people into the picture, and we were pulling ourselves out of the picture."
So their incentive for winning was what?
Tradition.
They got to stop wearing dink caps. What were those?
That's right. That's right. That's
something that identified them as lowly underclassmen?
Yes. There was quite a bit of hazing
okay.
in the first 20 years of the university. And in the 1930s, they tried very hard to stop the hazing.
All right. Getting back to our photos, please.
This is a very famous day in the life of the leftist movement on campus. This is May of 1972, when the students went and blocked the railroad track, and 66 students got arrested for blocking the railroad tracks in an anti-Vietnam War demonstration. This was the big time. Shortly after this happened, the next week, I was on campus interviewing for a summer session teaching job, and everybody I talked to said, "We're just as big as Berkeley. We had students, we tried to stop a train."
Well, you know, we always hear a lot about Berkeley during the 60s and during that era, and I never really heard much of that history. I knew it was here, but it wasn't as vocal or as apparent at Davis. But apparently it did exist. And you walked right into the middle of it. That's when you entered.
This is in the sports chapter, and this is boxing. In 1921, we got a rec hall after much lobbying, and it was rec hall 1 of 2 and 3. And the boxing event, which was the inauguration of the building, was a big-time event. This could be a photograph in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, it's packed.
People are dressed seriously, and the Fighting Gomez brothers were on the ticket. Next. Now here is Maria Welch, and she got hired in 1947. And within 2 years, the first woman coach had taught 8 different sports. She had been the coach and instructor for 8 different sports, including equestrian, basketball, volleyball, archery, and she did it all.
She was a trailblazer.
And she just died a year ago.
Yeah.
And she was a great contributor to the university, one of the many powerful, effective, dedicated personalities. Next. We have a lot of slides of Picnic Day in the book, and this one is the Agronomy Department, and at the keystone of the arch is agronomy, and it says agricultural progress across the top, and then all of the other disciplines are subsidiary to agronomy in terms of making agricultural progress. It's 1919, and the Arc de Triomphe is the model for the picnic day float.
Okay.
Next. Here's from the late 1950s, and it says fruits of progress, and it's basically chemicalization of your picnic basket, and it shows the chemicalization of agriculture is chasing the ants away, and it's producing really huge fruit in your picnic basket.
Well, this is still an issue today, obviously.
Well, but our campus by 1963 was a leader in the anti-DDT movement. Bob Rudd wrote a book that was paralleled Silent Spring, and he actually drafted it before Silent Spring, but Rachel Carson was drafted. And he was a friend of Rachel Carson's, and they communicated with each other. So he was a big influence on Silent Spring.
I did not
Davis
know that.
campus.
Very
We
interesting.
helped do in DDT.
Well, that's something to be proud of.
Yeah. Oh, we have a big environmentalist credential here.
Yeah. Okay, Dennis, what are we looking at now?
Oh, the last two photographs are two international faculty members who were really very good and helped make UCDavis a top-ranked school. This is Max Kleiber, Swiss by birth, came here in 1928, and he was just a fabulous scientist. This is a simulator of respiratory functions in cows, modeling the feedbacks between nutrition, diet, amount of sleep they had, and the chemicals. It's called the artificial cow. So there was Max Kleiber, who we were really lucky to get from Switzerland. And next, and finally, is Katherine Esau, who came from the Ukraine. And she was here for 33 years, and she made it into the National Academy of Sciences. She was very distinguished, and one of the first workers with the electron microscope. And there she is in a very charming picture with her new version of the electron microscope.
How about that? Well, thank you for bringing those photos. I want to tell our viewers that the photos you brought tonight are just a fraction of what the book contains. It really is.
231 photos.
It really is history.
Of them.
So let's talk about where some of the photos came from. I know you as a historian, a local historian with Hattie Weber.
Historical geographer.
Historical geographer. So I know that you brought some of them forward, but you also, where else did you source these photos?
Well, we have about 17 places that contributed one photo each. The bulk of them came from the university's special collections, where they've been preparing for this book for 25 years. They have 4,000 photos of the history of UCDavis.
Wow.
But we found a great number of them in scrapbooks and from other collectors and persons who photos that weren't in the special collections. So we helped make them a better special collections for the next book.
By choosing what to highlight.
Yeah, but most importantly, they were the groundwork for my co-author's book in 2001, Abundant Harvest, which is a very serious scholarly book about the University of California of Davis. It's the definitive history book, 400 pages, twice as many photographs as we have. One of our troubles was that Anne had put so many of the great photographs into her book, and we didn't want to just be picking half of her photographs.
Right, and I did read that book, and honestly, this one is a lot more fun. It's a lot more consumable because it's visual. I'm a visual person, so that really worked for me. Yeah. Now, you mentioned Picnic Day. I'll use Picnic Day as an example of one of those campus traditions that started so long ago. It's still going strong. It's not without its problems, but it seemed to go off well this year. And it really serves to highlight all these things we're talking about, all these different departments.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I learned in the doing of it, because my colleague at the Hattie Weber Museum, Jim Beckett, reminded me that his dad went to the first picnic day. His dad and grandfather went to the first picnic day, and when he would go with his dad, they absolutely had to go visit the agricultural engineering exhibits, which was a review of farm machinery that has been developed both by the market and by university experimentation.
Right.
So we have a wonderful photograph of an onion harvester mounted on an Alice Chalmers tractor. Just one of many things in the ag engineering display.
Right. And some of the other departments, I know a lot of the photos in here highlight what was a very thriving dairy program. And at the time, there were some real innovations. People could actually walk up to a counter and buy butter and milk and ice cream that had been freshly produced. That doesn't exist anymore, though.
Well, that still happens at Wazoo, at Washington State University in Pullman. You can buy Cougar cheese as well as other things. And for a very long time, we marketed it because we produce all this dairy products. We produce cottage cheese and cheese and butter, and we couldn't just throw it away. Yes, it was a lot of people remember the downtown store on 2nd Street near G, as well as going into the dairy industry building. Earlier you had mentioned in the 1930s, something that's in the book, and I'm glad you brought it up, and that is half the students for a time in the 1930s were dairy industry majors, because you could get a job running a creamery and replacing the first generation of creamery managers. And half of everybody registered at UCDavis in the middle of the Depression were here for dairy industry studies.
Right, so it was very on-the-ground training with real jobs attached to it.
Yes, you got to make ice cream.
Not theoretical. Yeah.
One of the first things I learned about UCDavis was going to the Dreyer's ice cream store on College Avenue in Berkeley, and on the menu it said, Mr. Dreyer was majored in ice cream husbandry at UCDavis. For his master's degree, he invented Raspberry Ripple. For his PhD, he developed Rocky Road. Of course, it was a joke.
But it's a great claim to fame.
Reminded me there was a department of ice cream husbandry.
Right.
Except there wasn't. It was animal husbandry, ice cream. It was dairy science.
Well, talking about how people used to be able to buy dairy products reminds me, today the campus still has something they call Meat Lab, where you can go and buy. I actually heard about it from a friend. I have to admit, I haven't been there myself, but people swear by this. Yeah. What do you know about it? Tell us what it is.
I have never been there.
You haven't been there.
I grew up in a town that had a big slaughterhouse, and from my visits to the slaughterhouse, I have no desire to go anywhere near a meat packing operation.
Well, my understanding is that those who are studying animal husbandry, much like the dairy students did, they produce products and people can go and purchase them. And they're locally produced right at UCDavis.
And that still goes on right now.
Right, yeah, it's a current day thing.
It's near our rodeo grounds. We're one of the few campuses that had what was a functioning rodeo grounds.
Right. Well, Dennis, we're about at the end of our time. I think it's just flown by. I would, really encourage anyone who is interested in the history of UCDavis and its connection to our community here to check out this book, learn more. I believe it's available locally, and I want to thank you for coming and sharing some of your time and expertise as a historical geographer, and I will get that right from here on out. And you really know a lot about your subject matter, and it's been a pleasure.
And I do want to conclude by reminding everyone that Ann Schuring wrote the book.
Yes.
And she wrote most of the captions for this book. And it really was made a pleasure because she knows so much more.
Right.
And both of her books are terrific.
Well, we thank both you and Ann for providing us with this important resource. And thanks for tuning in to In the Studio. I've been your host, Autumn Labbe-Renault, and I want to remind you that you can find this program and others from In the Studio online at dctv.davismedia.org. Thanks so much for tuning in.